Welcome to Career Tools. Today's topic, dealing with coworkers who aren't pulling their weight. Here we go. We're asked frequently by junior team members, generally, but sometimes they're simply just individual contributors, sometimes by managers that are working with others, right? About other people they work with who aren't pulling their weight, other folks on the team who just aren't getting it done. People are supposed to be contributing to a project or should have reviewed a process paper, or who told your key customer they deal with something and either dropped the ball or handled it poorly simply because they didn't care. I mean, all these kind of situations. We have a peer, somebody we're working with, who just isn't pulling their weight and they want to know what to do. And surprise, surprise, they call us.
Yeah. The problem with the answer to the question is that the question isn't the right question. It's the wrong question. You can't really do anything about somebody else's behavior in general, especially if you have no relationship with them. And of course, somebody's not pulling their weight. People just don't reach out to them, right? They want to shun them.
Yeah, they pull away
from the office. Right, exactly. Yeah. So if you can't change them, really the question becomes, okay, what do I do? Right? As opposed to, how do I get them to pull their weight? And we have 3 recommendations, very simple. The first one is don't complain, simply because that's what we hear a lot of people doing, and it doesn't do any good. So let's save our breath, and let's reduce our political risk, and let's be smart and not complain.
Don't complain. You're no fun at all.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I mean, what are we going to talk about around the water cooler? Come on, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is that line? Great people talk about ideas. Most people talk about things, and the people who are ineffective talk about other people. Point 2 is to work with them, to reach out and to figure out whatever you need to do to work around their weakness and to make sure that their lack of weight pulling is considered in your plans and processes. And the third point is, look, it's simple. Many of you are already thinking of it. We recommend in a situation like this, you use the peer feedback model, which we'll touch on.
So just like with many Career Tools recommendations, we're going to recommend that you do exactly the opposite of what everyone else is doing and don't complain. Oh, great.
Yeah, look, we know it's hard to be the only one on a team, if in fact that's the case, who's being a professional, doing what's right, doing things the hard way. We do try to make our recommendations as easy as possible, recognizing this problem. Look, in some ways, this is an easy recommendation. Just don't complain. Just be quiet. Just don't make a point of finding somebody else and saying, you won't believe what Bob did, right? Again, don't complain to your boss. Don't complain to your colleagues. Certainly don't complain to customers, which always stuns me. The old inside baseball thing, let me open the kimono and show you how bad we are at what we do. Don't complain to your best friend at work, right? And if you really have to, if you feel a burning desire, complain to your spouse and leave it there. And we would recommend that you not do that to your spouse as well. But if you have to, go ahead, just because he or she is outside the workplace. If they work with you, try not to talk about it.
I suppose many folks out there might be surprised about the fact that we suggest you don't share your complaints with your coworkers, or particularly not share your complaints with your boss. But we often tell people there are 2 reasons to fire someone: performance and tearing down the team. And folks, complaining about team members is tearing down the team. It's not something we tolerate. It's not something we encourage other managers to tolerate. And it's not something you should tolerate in yourself or others. It's simple. Just don't complain.
Yeah, we could say that 10 different ways, and I don't think we'd ever say it strong enough, because we know some of you are still thinking, well, everyone does it, right? It's so common. It must be a technique that works. I mean, it must work in some fashion. People get, the rumor mill gets back to that person and they're ashamed and they start working harder.
Yeah.
But the fact is, even though it's the most popular solution, complaining just doesn't achieve anything positive. And for those of you who think, well, Manager Tools and Career Tools have recommended at times that I be direct with people, let's be clear about that too. Complaining to the person directly will rarely change their behavior. And if it does, if they actually change their behavior, it'll only be short term. It will not last. People don't like to be complained to about themselves. Think about this. Say the person who has not been pulling their weight is due to send you a weekly report on Tuesday at 8 a.m. so that you can do some work on it. And they're late every dang week. They know they're late, and as far as you know, they're making no effort to be on time, or they have an excuse. They may make an effort, but they have an excuse and they believe their own excuse. There could be a systemic reason for them not getting the report to you on time, such as the system hasn't produced it yet, which frankly complaining won't change. Or they have it and they just don't send it. If they're complaining, or if they really don't care, you're complaining, it's not going to change anything. It just does not solve the problem. It makes us feel better for a few minutes. It might make us feel less alone and fighting the malaise of other people. It might give us a way to bond more closely with our colleagues, but it doesn't change anything.
I've never seen somebody complaining to a colleague result in more bonding. That generally doesn't work. And if that doesn't work, folks, then complaining to your colleagues is not going to solve the problem either. Let's just add somebody in the middle of all that, right?
Yeah.
Again, in particular, this case of complaining to one of our colleagues about Bob, it might make us feel better for a few minutes, right? But that's about it. The worst thing about all that, though, is if I complain to Judy about Bob, you know what Judy's thinking? Judy is wondering when I'm going to throw her under the bus when I'm talking to Bob. So talking about, and it's a double whammy. It breaks down a relationship with Bob, and it breaks down a relationship with Judy. Perfect.
Yep. So complaining to our customers as well is disloyal to the company. It makes them think of us as devious. It erodes their trust in us. I don't know why external complaining would make sense to anybody, but it does. Apparently it does. It's surprisingly common. You've all called the service center for a bank or a telecom provider, and it was said to you something, that person shouldn't have promised you that, or they did that wrong, or that team never do it the way they're supposed to. Oh, you have to be careful about calling the North Carolina service center. No, sir, Dallas is better or something, right? Think about it. How do you feel then? You're the recipient of the complaining. You're still frustrated, and now you have a negative impression of the person you're talking to. Don't do this to your customers. Look, I don't know how many times we can say it. Complaining to someone else never changes a colleague's behavior. Complaining to the boss is the worst thing you can do.
Really? Why?
Yeah.
Why is that? I mean,
Why?
Can't my boss fix the problem? I mean, surely she can, right?
Oh, sure. Wave that magic boss wand, right? Complaining to your boss sometimes gets what you need done, and so it can seem effective. But the ripple effects of that kind of involvement are almost always all negative. The boss wonders about your loyalty. He wonders about your ability to build relationships and why can't you get things done on your own? Why can't you work things out? Then your colleague, the one who's not pulling their weight, the one who's late on things, the one whose work is sloppy, the one who constantly blows you off, the one who's never at their desk, they feel negatively toward you for you throwing them under the bus with the boss. And other colleagues, not the one who's been the problem, they wonder whether we'll do it to them. Go complain to the boss when they don't do what they're supposed to do. And really, you've lost your escalation point, right? Once you do it one time, if you use the boss's role power to solve the problem again, you're like the boy who cries wolf, and you're going to have to go do that every time. And all that does is, again, cause the relationship to deteriorate between you and the boss, between you and your team, and between you and your peer. And I know some of the folks listening, particularly younger folks, will say, well, okay, but this person isn't doing it right. That's what the boss is supposed to do. The boss is supposed to enforce all the rules. Well, really not exactly. That's not what bosses' roles are. And frankly, you could easily say you believe that about the boss, and the boss could easily say, why haven't you figured out a way to work with this person? Because that's what we all have to do. That's part of your responsibilities. So complain to the boss is really a bad idea. Please, I know you may feel that that's a way to right the wrong that is happening, and the boss has power. But if you're going to have to work with a person for a long time, it's relationships that matter and not role power.
Yeah. I guess one option in this case would be simply to ignore the problem, but we can't do that. So let's just take that option off the table. So
right.
We have to work with them, right? And here's the secret. Muttering in the corner, complaining to everyone who will listen may feel good, but it doesn't solve the problem. To solve the problem, you have to address the issue head on. Now, when I say head on, I don't mean taking an aggressive stance, right? Making a confrontation about it. But you need to go to talk to the person in a reasonable and professional way. Now, here's the problem. If you don't have a relationship with the person, it's going to be difficult to have that conversation. The conversation is going to be much more successful if you've already developed a relationship with them. I've never been in sales, but you've told me about your sales experience. And one of the first things that anybody knows in sales or learns in sales is that people buy from people they like. And folks, when you're asking somebody to do something for you, you're selling them something. You're selling them the opportunity to help you.
Yep.
And, well, people do things on time for people they like too.
Yeah, I know this is probably boring for some of you, but if you are bored of us telling you to build relationships with people, we're sorry. The problem is organizations are full of people, and the way to work well with people is to have relationships with them. And it is hard work, and it's particularly hard work when somebody's not doing their job. It would be just as easy to shun somebody the way you did when you were in your early teens, maybe in high school in the United States, where you said, oh, that person's not cool, so I'm not going to talk to them. And you try to shun them. Unfortunately, in an organization, you're wedded to them. Probably too strong a word. You're welded to them in some ways. You're not going to be able to get away from them. The ecosystem you're traveling in is so small. There's no way to get around the fact that you're going to have some relationship, even if it's slightly distasteful. And I would just argue, I'll tell you, a lot of people say my partner does this, or my buddy does this, or this coworker or associate does this or this or this. And I always want to say, let he who be without sin cast the first stone, right? That they may be a lot worse than you. And we're not suggesting that they're not, but we all have our own foibles. And there are things that people don't want to work with us on that we hope that they will fight their way through and continue to work with us on and not throw us under the bus. Look, even if what you're waiting for is a weekly report, which has been late for the last 12 weeks or longer, it's late every week. That's just this guy. He's just that way. Start over. This week, instead of waiting for the report being late on Tuesday, go and talk to the person and see what you can find out about the situation. How do they get the report? When do they get it? What do they have to do before they send it to you, right? Go over and say, hey, look, this week is really important for me to have the report on time. I just like to understand a little bit better about either how you get it ready or what you're working on so that I can maybe help, or we can be sure that I have it in enough time. Maybe you're going to be gone the next day or whatever. Explain to them the problem you have when it's late, and do it as if they were a trusted coworker. Now, look, they could easily stiff arm you. They could easily say, yeah, whatever, I'm busy. You don't understand. Okay. That could happen. And since that's what they're already doing, it's not going to kill you that they do it again to your face. Okay. A different situation. When you have a new piece of work assigned to you and you know it relies on somebody else, talk to them right away when the work is assigned, right?
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. The likelihood of something being late and causing you problems when you don't talk about it until it's very close to the deadline is much higher.
Right. Your emotions are up, right? You're disappointed. You're perhaps in a little bit of trouble or in a little bit of a pinch. And so when you talk to them at that point, man, it's just laden with emotion, right?
Yeah. You lower the chances of there being problems the sooner you talk about it, right? Make sure you explain what you need, explain when you need it, and look, importantly, explain why you need it. Understanding the big picture helps everybody, even lousy coworkers, pardon the phrase. It helps them be more effective in their part of the thing, in whatever project you're working on. Get a verbal commitment. This is important. We teach this all the time. You can ask, hey, when can you have it to me? And make them come up with a date and make them say it out loud, or say, hey, can you have it to me on Thursday? And if they say, well, gee, I don't know. Well, when can you have it to me? Well, gee, I don't know. Well, okay, I'd really like it on Thursday. Can you try to get it to me on Thursday? And yeah, there are some people who know the game you're playing and they're not going to say yes. On the other hand, if in fact there's a meeting that you're in, this person is in the meeting and they say, well, gee, I didn't know it was due on Thursday, then you could actually go back to them and say, look, I asked you 3 times for it on Thursday. What am I missing that you're willing to say in a meeting I didn't know it was due on Thursday? In fact, you don't have to throw them under the bus. They know they're throwing themselves under the bus, and your job is to try to keep the relationship going. You don't want to forgive them for everything, but the sooner you talk about it, allows you more time to help resolve problems, help get rid of issues that come up. and frankly, to foresee things that might cause a problem well before the problem arises. Now, look, in addition to the verbal commitment, consider getting one in writing. After you say, hey, can you have it to me on Thursday? And they say, yeah, I'll try. Say, hey, send an email, later on that day or the next morning saying, hey, look, this is just to reiterate that I need it on Thursday. And I want to repeat again, having somebody say out loud they're going to do something by a certain time is one of the most powerful commitments that people make. It'd be great if you were their boss. A verbal commitment out loud that the boss hears is really powerful, but there's still value in it coming from a peer to a peer. And then something else too. People who don't pull their weight are going to take more of your time. It's as simple as that. Rather than getting frustrated that they're not doing what they're supposed to do and managing them as if they were somebody else, do things different around them. Depending upon the length of time you've got for the deadline, follow up with them before it's due. One of the big problems I see when people talk to me when I'm trying to help somebody get better, one of the big problems I see is that they manage all their peers the same. And when somebody is underperforming, they say, well, I'm frustrated by that person and they should be doing this and they should be doing that. Managing a peer relationship is just like managing a subordinate relationship. We don't manage everyone the same. We don't treat all of our relationships the same. Every relationship is different. We often say in front of clients, don't manage the whole team. Younger managers often make statements and they say, well, my team this and my team that, they did this, they did that. Whereas more senior managers say, hey, my team is great because Bob is this and Terry is this and Jane is this and Sarah is that. And they distinguish between everybody on the team. Great managers know that you manage each individual on the team, and that allows the team's total output to be big, but you really can't manage the entire team. The same thing's true with your peers. If one of your peers is not performing up to par, you don't simply do the same things you would do with everybody else and then complain when they don't respond. You manage the relationship differently. You engage in different behaviors in order to get the most out of them. When Jane, who is habitually late, gives you something and the quality is poor, you have to tell her early and you have to tell her often and you have to follow up, as opposed to Bob, who's always on time and the quality is great. You don't manage Jane the way you manage Bob and then complain about Jane. You engage in different behaviors to get different output from Jane. And yes, you have less power, but think about it this way. If you're not a manager yet, and maybe you don't ever want to be a manager, but if you ever were to become a manager, learning how to manage each peer differently is an important life skill, and it will be important when you're a manager, as I've just shared an example of, right? So depending upon the length of time of the deadline, you may have to follow up before it's due, even if you don't think you have to, or you don't have to with Bob and Terry and Jane, but suddenly you do with Sarah. You don't have to go make them admit that they agreed to it. You can be very light about it. You can say, hey, mate, I know you agreed to get that report to me by 8 a.m. tomorrow. I just want to check there's no problems. You don't need anything from me. I've got time on my calendar tomorrow to take what you give me and put it into the larger process. So if you're thinking, gee, that bums me out that I have to do something different, okay, we respect that and we recommend you do something different. This does require extra work from you because somebody else isn't reliable. But look at it this way. You can be the guy who complains to his boss about other people, or you can be the guy who gets stuff done on time and to quality, even when it does rely on other people. Oh, which guy do you think is going to get promoted first?
Yeah. So now let's talk about the peer feedback model, because longtime listeners, particularly of Manager Tools, will absolutely expect this. I mean, we have an entire podcast on the peer feedback model, and frankly, I'd encourage folks to go listen to it. It's pretty straightforward, and if you know the full feedback model, it's really simple. So Mark, why don't you cover the peer feedback model just very quickly as a reminder for a lot of folks and a very short introduction for others.
Yeah, so it's really simple. You take the 4-step feedback model, you cut away steps 1 and step 4, and you focus on the heart of the model, which is step 2 and step 3. Step 2 is when you do this, and step 3 is here's what happens. You're simply saying you took an action and here's an outcome. I often describe it to people as all you're doing is sharing with them something they may not know about an outcome or an effect they're having in the organization. And the idea is you don't ask step one because they're not a direct and there's no pressure relative to boss-subordinate relationship. And what we found is a lot of people say, well, gee, it would sound better to me if I asked my peer first, hey, can I share something with you? But we found that actually peers who know about the feedback model don't like that at all. And it comes across much more casually just to say, hey, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but when you do that, this makes me late. And so just thought you'd want to know. And of course, you don't mention step 4 since this is negative feedback, although the peer feedback model works for positive feedback as well. But you wouldn't say, can you do that differently? Because you have no power to compel. And they don't. Most peers don't want to be put on the hook by you by committing to new behavior the next time.
And the tone is, it's not a snarky one, right? It's kind of an aside. Like, I don't know if you know this, but you did this, you engaged in this kind of behavior, and here's what happens. Just thought you'd want to know.
Just thought you want to know. Right. No worries. So again, the first step, which is step 2 in the 4-step model, don't get confused, folks, is just to state the behavior. You identify behavior you've noted. It sounds like when you do X, and then you describe the impact. And in our original model, it would be step 3. You describe what happens because of what they did. You just say, here's what happens. You don't actually have to say, here's what happens. But if you say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but when you're late to me with this, I get dinged by the boss every time. I just thought you'd want to know. Just wanted to share that. That is the peer feedback model. It works for all your peers in the organization. It works particularly well for colleagues who forget messages or to give us a vital piece of information. Say, hey, when the customer gives you a message, you don't give it to me. Neither one of us looks terribly good. I just thought you'd want to know that. We don't ask the person to do something differently. We just hopefully rely on that person getting the unspoken message. 9 times out of 10, we guarantee the person will apologize for their oversight and try to do better the next time. And you might say, well, it might introduce a little bit of a pinch. Yeah, it might. And this is the way you manage relationships. You pinch somebody in the relationship rather than letting a lot of missed pinches become a crunch later on where you have a huge falling out and you scream at them, you never get anything to me on time. And of course, the word never is problematic for most people.
Yeah. And look, there's a mindset here, folks. You can't make the person change their behavior next time. You can't. You can't make them do it differently. All you can do is encourage them to do it differently, right? And if they are only 10% more likely to do it on time next time, say timeliness was the issue, then that's a win, right? If you encourage them 10% more each time, after a few times, they're going to be very highly likely to get it done on time. That's all you can do is increase the probability of them doing it next time and be comfortable and happy with that.
Yeah. Exactly. And let me say something else. Before we wrap up, some folks who will say, well, that's great, but I'm not waiting on stuff from my colleagues. I just know I'm doing more work than anybody else on the team, and that's not fair. It's not fair. There's 2 answers to that whole fairness thing. First, as we're sure your mother told you, life isn't fair. Fairness is not a concept for the work world. It's for games that are well established. Fairness is a concept, the desire for which will leave you racked in tears most often. The world is not fair. If fairness happens to you and you're not in a game where rules are applied strictly, consider yourself lucky. When we tell people we're treating somebody else fairly, really what we're saying is we believe what we're doing is reasonable and reciprocal. And we're applying a global standard to our definition of what is reciprocal and reasonable. They may, in fact, not feel it's fair. Think about those of you who are familiar with the DISC tool, right? If I'm a high D and you're an S and you're not interrupting me, you're agreeing with me and going along with me, and that's the way you treat people fairly, I would say to you, that's not what I want. I want you to challenge me. I want you to disagree with me. I want you to tell me I'm wrong if I need to be wrong. On the other hand, if a D tells an S, if a D keeps interrupting an S and says, I'm interrupting because that's what's fair. You want me to interrupt you because that's what makes for better outcomes, introducing a little bit of conflict and making the idea better. The S says, well, that's not fair to me. You're rude. And the D says, gee, I thought I was being fair. Why? Because they're applying their own standard of reasonableness of relationships and reciprocity and saying, and this is the world standard for fairness. Fairness generally ought to be widely agreed to. And since you can't get wide agreement on most things regarding what's fair and what's not, there's really very few times when fairness is a good standard to apply to a situation. You'd be amazed how differently people define fairness. Again, unless you're in a game where fairness is assured by the rules. In fact, as I told somebody this about games and rules and fairness once, and they said, Mark, that's silly. Let's not talk about rules requiring fairness. Fairness is something that we can achieve without rules. The reason we have rules is because nobody was fair for so long. They had to make the rules so precise to avoid people complaining they weren't being treated fairly. So don't worry about things being fair. Well, you can worry about things being fair, but worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Worrying about fairness won't solve your problem. And it's certainly, if you ask your peer to treat you fairly, they're going to apply their own standard to that unless you define things very, very precisely. And frankly, that's why some companies' rules and processes are so tightly constrained. And look, the other reason that this is important is your boss knows you're doing more work. Your boss probably knows anyway, if indeed you are doing more work. And more work is a good thing. Yes, we suppose it's possible that someone's mistreating you and your boss doesn't know, but generally speaking, they do. Into every life, a little rain must fall. Please don't complain about it. Frankly, doing more work is a good thing. It means you're being developed, you're growing, you're learning how to handle a peer. And if you can handle a peer well who underperforms, then you'll be able to handle your directs when you're given role power also with the same technique without having to use your role power. Stop worrying or complaining about other people's work. Concentrate on doing your work to the best of your ability. If you want to get ahead, that's where your effort should be concentrated. So, summing up, don't complain. Work with the other person, reach out, talk to them earlier, communicate more often, change your behavior with your peer who's letting you down, and don't complain that they're not behaving the way everybody else does. And then use our peer feedback model. That's the way to do it.
Pretty simple. All right, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, partner.
We'll see you. Thanks, everyone. That's it. We'll see you all again next week. Have a great one. So long.